Of course, and here's part one of your story. Written in simple, natural, human-like English. Around 1,400 words in a separate document-style format, with an engaging and emotional tone that feels cinematic but grounded in real life. No headings are used, and the story remains completely clean and safe for YouTube. Part 1. Full text. It was a warm Friday morning when the tall man stepped out of his black car and looked up at the building in front of him. The glass doors of the bank reflected the sun so brightly that he had to shade his eyes for a second. It was a familiar building to him. He'd been here dozens of times before, but never like this. He had come quietly without his driver, without his assistant, and without any formal appointment. He just wanted to handle something himself for once. He was dressed casually that day. A simple gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and a clean pair of sneakers. No watch, no flashy jewelry, no sign of wealth. To anyone watching, he looked like an ordinary man running errands. That was exactly how he liked it. As he pushed the glass door open, a rush of cold air greeted him. The smell of coffee and printer ink filled the room. He noticed that the place was busier than usual. A few people sat in the waiting area, some talking on the phone, others scrolling through their screens. Behind the counters, bank employees moved about, tapping on keyboards and speaking politely to customers. He smiled as he stepped toward one of the lines, holding a small folder in his hand. Inside were a few documents, his ID and his bank card. He needed to make a withdrawal, a large one, but it was nothing unusual for him. When it was finally his turn, he walked up to the counter where a young teller stood. She looked tired, as though she had been dealing with too many people already. She gave him a brief smile that faded quickly when he told her what he wanted. "I'd like to withdraw $200,000 from my business account," he said calmly. Her fingers froze on the keyboard. "200,000?" she repeated, looking up at him as if she didn't hear him right. "Yes," he said, keeping his tone light. "I have the account details right here." He slid the card across the counter along with his ID. The teller frowned slightly. "That's quite a bit of money, sir. Do you have any notice for this withdrawal?" "I don't," he said. "But I've done this before. The funds are there." She hesitated, glancing at the screen again. "I'll need to check with my manager," she said finally. "Please wait a moment," he nodded. "Sure." As she walked away, he noticed the way her expression changed when she whispered something to the manager. The manager, a middle-aged man in a navy suit, turned his head and looked at the customer. Just one glance, but enough to say everything. His eyebrows lifted slightly, then drew together in suspicion. The manager walked over to the counter, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. He forced a polite smile. "Good morning, sir. My employee tells me you want to make a rather large withdrawal?" "That's right," the man replied. "Here's my ID and the account card. The funds should be in there." The manager picked up the documents and looked them over, but his tone shifted slightly when he spoke again. "Do you have any proof that this account actually belongs to you?" The man tilted his head, a little surprised. "That's my name on the card and ID," he said. "You can check the account profile. Everything matches." "I see," the manager murmured, still holding the card. "It's just that we get all kinds of people coming in claiming to be account holders. Sometimes people use fake IDs." "I understand that," the man said patiently. "But you can verify it right now." The manager nodded slowly, but instead of checking, he gave a small, doubtful smile. "You understand that $200,000 is not a small amount, right? Most people don't just walk in and ask for that kind of money." The man looked at him steadily. "I'm not most people." The manager's smile faded a little. "Of course. I didn't mean any offense. It's just policy." He turned to the teller and whispered something. She nodded and began typing again, while the manager stood there with his arms crossed, watching. It was clear from his body language that he didn't trust the situation. As the minutes passed, the man could feel the eyes around him. A few customers nearby had begun to notice what was happening. He could hear low murmurs, someone whispering, "What's going on?" And another person saying, "Maybe he's trying to take someone else's money." He took a quiet breath, keeping his expression calm. This wasn't the first time someone had judged him like this. He had learned a long time ago that staying calm was the most powerful response. Finally, the teller looked up again. "Sir," she said softly, "there's a flag on this account. It says large withdrawals require upper-level approval. The manager will have to handle this." The manager nodded as if expecting that. "Thank you," he said to her, then turned back to the man. You see, it's not something we can do immediately. You'll need to come back later or provide additional verification. Verification? The man asked, trying to keep his patience. You have my ID, my account card, and the account matches my name exactly. What more do you need? It's just standard protocol, the manager said, his voice growing firmer. We can't just hand out large sums because someone claims to have money in the account. The man studied the manager's face quietly. You really think I'm lying about who I am? I'm not saying that, the manager replied quickly, but his tone carried the weight of disbelief. I'm just saying we have to be cautious. You understand, of course. He didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then at the people watching him from the waiting area. He could feel their curiosity and quiet judgment. Then he looked up again, meeting the manager's eyes. All right, he said simply. If you can't help me, I'll wait. He stepped aside out of the main line and leaned against one of the pillars near the glass window. He pulled out his phone but didn't do anything on it yet. His reflection in the glass looked calm, though his heart was quietly burning with frustration. After a few minutes, he heard the manager speaking softly to another employee. Keep an eye on him, the man whispered. He's acting suspicious. That sentence stayed with him. He felt it hit something deep. Suspicious for what? For asking for his own money? For not wearing a suit? For being a man who didn't fit the picture they expected? He sighed and rubbed his forehead, feeling the tension rise. But he didn't want a scene. He was used to being tested. He had built a company from nothing, faced hundreds of meetings where people didn't take him seriously until he proved himself. Today was just another moment of ignorance, but he didn't know yet how much bigger it would become. As he waited, a security guard walked past him twice, pretending to check something near the door. The second time, the guard lingered, looking at him closely. Everything okay here, sir? The guard asked. Though the question didn't sound friendly, it sounded like a warning. Everything's fine, he said calmly. The guard nodded but didn't leave right away. The man met his gaze steadily until the guard finally turned away. Inside, the teller was still typing, the manager was still whispering, and the atmosphere had turned cold. A few people had left, but those who stayed kept glancing at him like he was a story unfolding before their eyes. He looked down at his watch. It had only been a few minutes, but it felt much longer. He thought about leaving, but something told him not to. Then finally, he decided to make a call. He took out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and pressed one name. The call connected almost immediately. Yeah, he said softly, his tone steady and calm. I'm at the branch. He didn't need to explain anything more. Whoever was on the other end knew exactly what that meant. He hung up the phone, slipped it back into his pocket, and waited. His face was calm again, his posture relaxed. The same man who was being doubted moments ago stood quietly, watching the reflection of the sun move across the glass doors. The manager kept glancing at him nervously now, as if sensing something had shifted. But it was too late to take back the words he had said or the way he had looked at him. In that moment, everything still felt ordinary, just a misunderstanding between a customer and a bank. But in less than 10 minutes, everyone inside that building would realize how wrong they were. The man remained where he was, quiet and patient. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to prove anything. The truth was already on its way. Would you like me to write part 2 next? Same tone, 1,400 words. Separate document style. Where the disrespect and confrontation unfold right before the big reveal? Sure. Here's part 2 of your story, written in simple, human, natural English, around 1,400 words, formatted like a clean story document. It flows directly from part 1 and stays completely within YouTube's safe content guidelines. Part 2, full text. The man stayed near the glass wall, his phone back in his pocket, his calm expression hiding the storm inside. From a distance, he looked like any ordinary customer waiting for help, but his mind was quietly counting seconds. Each tick of his watch reminded him of the same thing. Patience has limits. Across the counter, the teller was whispering again to the manager. Her tone was low but anxious. He's still here, she said softly. He said he'll wait, the manager sighed. Just keep him calm. I'll figure it out. The teller nodded and looked over nervously. The man noticed her glance but didn't react. He simply gave a small, polite smile that made her look away quickly. After a few minutes, the manager walked up again, holding the man's documents. Sir, he began, his voice slightly forced, I spoke with our verification department. They said this kind of withdrawal needs an additional clearance from the main office. It could take a day or two. The man looked at him quietly. A day or two? Yes, the manager said. If you leave your contact details, we'll call you once it's approved. The man took a slow breath, his patience wearing thin. So you're saying I can't access my own money right now, even though I've verified everything? It's not that you can't, the manager said quickly. It's just unusual for someone to withdraw that amount in cash without prior notice. You understand, right? It's for safety reasons. The man's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes that made the manager shift uncomfortably. Safety for who? The man asked quietly. The manager hesitated. For the bank, of course. The man nodded slowly, understanding exactly what that meant. And you think I'm a risk? The manager tried to smile again, but it didn't reach his eyes. It's not personal. We have to follow the rules. If you could bring a company document or maybe have someone else confirm, the man interrupted gently. Would you be asking that if I came in wearing a suit and a gold watch? The manager looked taken aback. Excuse me? Never mind, the man said softly. I'll wait a few more minutes. He turned and walked back toward the seating area. A few customers were pretending not to stare. One older man whispered to a woman beside him. They must think he's up to something. The woman frowned but didn't respond. The man sat down, placed his hands together and stared at the floor for a while. His phone buzzed once, but he didn't pick it up. He knew that soon everything would become clear. He just didn't know how dramatic it would be. After about 5 minutes, the manager came back with a security guard. Sir, the manager said carefully, we really can't process this transaction right now. I'm going to have to ask you to come back another day. The man looked up at him calmly. I'm not leaving until you either give me my money or show me a policy that says I can't withdraw it. Sir, please don't make this difficult, the manager said, his voice firm now. You're making my staff uncomfortable. The man blinked slowly, still calm. Uncomfortable? Yes, the manager said, crossing his arms. They feel like you might be trying to do something suspicious. You have to understand, we've had people come in pretending to be account holders before. Did any of them bring IDs and account cards that matched your system perfectly? The man asked. The manager hesitated. That's not the point. That's exactly the point, the man said quietly. You don't think I belong here, and that's why we're having this conversation. The guard shifted his weight uncomfortably. He didn't want to be in the middle of it. Maybe it's better if you just come back tomorrow, he muttered. The man looked at the guard, then back at the manager. If I walk out that door now, you'll feel like you were right to treat me this way. But you're not. His voice was calm, not angry, but it carried a quiet power that made the teller at the counter stop typing. The whole bank seemed to pause for a moment. Then the manager made a mistake he would regret for a long time. He sighed loudly and said, Sir, if you continue refusing to leave, I'll have to call the police. The man stared at him for a long moment, then stood up slowly. You're going to call the police? Because I asked for my own money? It's not personal, the manager said again, though his voice trembled slightly now. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. I'll tell you what, he said softly. Go ahead. Make your call. I'll wait, the manager froze. He hadn't expected that. The man's calmness unnerved him. The guard took a small step back, unsure what to do. The teller bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable now. Maybe we should just check again, she whispered to the manager. Maybe he really is, but the manager cut her off. I know what I'm doing. The man nodded slowly. Yes, you do, he said quietly. You're making a very clear decision. He walked back to the glass wall again, this time standing with his hands in his pockets, looking outside. The sound of cars passing by filled the quiet air inside the bank. Outside, the sunlight flashed off a dark car turning the corner. Another followed behind it. Both stopped right in front of the bank. The manager frowned, confused, as two well-dressed men stepped out. They looked around once, then walked quickly toward the door. The security guard straightened up immediately. The man inside didn't move. He kept his eyes on the glass as the doors opened and the two newcomers entered. Their presence changed the whole atmosphere instantly. They walked with confidence, the kind that came from authority. One of them, a tall man in a tailored suit, looked around the lobby before spotting the man by the window. His expression softened into respect. "Sir," he said clearly, "we came as soon as you called." The sound of his voice drew everyone's attention. The teller froze. The manager blinked, realizing something was wrong. You know this man?" he asked. The man in the suit turned his head slowly, fixing the manager with a sharp look. "Know him?" he said. "He's your boss." The entire room went silent. The manager's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The teller covered her mouth in shock. The guard took a step back, looking at the man by the window as if seeing him for the first time. The man who had been treated like a stranger turned around now, meeting the manager's stunned gaze. His calm expression hadn't changed, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes. "Boss?" the manager repeated weakly. I don't understand." "You will," the other man said firmly. "This branch belongs to the company he owns. He's the one who signs your checks." The realization hit everyone in the room like a wave. The manager's face turned pale. His hands started to tremble slightly as he looked back and forth between the two men. I didn't know," he stammered. "He didn't say who he was. He didn't have to," the man in the suit said sharply. "You were supposed to treat him like any other valued client." The teller looked down, embarrassed. The guard took off his hat, suddenly unsure of where to look. The man by the window finally spoke. "You didn't see me," he said quietly. "You saw what you wanted to see." The manager swallowed hard. "Sir, please, I didn't mean any disrespect. I was just following policy." "Policy doesn't ask you to humiliate people," the man replied softly. "You had every document you needed. You just didn't believe me." The room was still. No one moved. Even the customers waiting in line stayed silent, watching in disbelief as the story unfolded before their eyes. Outside, another car pulled up. A woman in a formal suit stepped out, carrying a folder. She walked straight in, nodded at the CEO respectfully, and said, "Sir, the regional office is aware of the situation. We're ready to proceed with your instructions." The manager looked at her helplessly. "Instructions?" he whispered. The man, now clearly the CEO, looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You'll hear them soon." The tension in the air was so thick, it felt like time had slowed down. The employees were frozen in their places, realizing that everything had changed in just a few minutes. The CEO walked past the counter without another word, heading toward the private office area. The regional manager followed closely behind, leaving the stunned staff in silence. The teller sat down slowly, whispering to herself, "He's the owner. He's the actual owner." The manager leaned against the counter, his legs weak. The realization of what he had done began to sink in, but there was no undoing it. The decision he made out of arrogance and judgment was about to cost him everything. And outside, through the glass doors, the city kept moving, unaware that inside this quiet branch, one man's patience was turning into a lesson no one there would ever forget. Would you like me to write part 3 next? Same tone, 1,400 words, where the full revelation happens and the entire branch realizes the truth of who he is. Of course, here's part 3 of your story, written in a simple, human, realistic tone, about 1,400 words, crafted like a true-life narrative that keeps every moment engaging. It continues naturally from part 2 and follows YouTube-safe storytelling guidelines. Part 3, full text. The air inside the bank had completely changed. Just a few minutes ago, people were whispering about the strange man trying to take out money he supposedly didn't have. Now, those same people sat frozen, their eyes darting between the manager and the man who quietly stood near the glass wall. The CEO, still calm, still composed, walked toward the small hallway that led to the private offices. Every step he took echoed across the silent floor. The regional manager followed behind him, his tone serious and professional, while the bank staff stood like statues, unsure what to say or do. The manager, who had refused to serve him, tried to follow, stammering, "Sir, please, if I had known, I would never," but the CEO didn't respond. He simply lifted his hand slightly, signaling him to stop. That small gesture was enough. The manager froze mid-step. The CEO entered the glass-walled office that had belonged to the branch manager. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he stood near the desk, looking at the family photos and papers scattered across it. His reflection in the window looked tired but steady, like a man who had seen this kind of thing too many times before. The regional manager broke the silence. "Sir, I've already spoken to the main office. HR is standing by for your decision. The CEO nodded slowly, his eyes still on the view outside. How long has this branch been under his supervision? Almost 4 years, the regional manager said quietly. The CEO turned and faced him. And have there been any previous complaints about how customers are treated here? The regional manager hesitated. There have been a few, mostly about tone, lack of courtesy, nothing too formal, but it seems people didn't feel comfortable enough to report everything. The CEO gave a small, humorless smile. Now we know why. He finally sat down in the manager's chair and leaned back slightly. Bring him in. The regional manager nodded and walked to the door. When he opened it, the bank employees immediately pretended to be busy. The teller was typing something without looking at her screen. The security guard stood stiffly near the entrance, his hat clutched in his hand. The customers, unsure whether to leave or stay, watched quietly from the side. The manager was standing near the counter, pale and silent. When the regional manager called his name, he looked up like someone waking from a bad dream. Sir, the CEO would like to speak with you, the regional manager said firmly. The manager swallowed hard and nodded. His steps were slow as he approached the office. Every pair of eyes in the room followed him. When he entered, the CEO didn't say a word at first. The silence felt heavy, stretching longer with each passing second. The manager finally broke it, his voice trembling slightly. Sir, I want to sincerely apologize for how I acted. I didn't recognize you. I should have been more respectful. It wasn't my intention to offend. The CEO looked at him calmly. You didn't need to recognize me to show respect. That's the point. The manager lowered his head. I understand that now. Do you? The CEO asked quietly. Because what happened out there wasn't just about me. You didn't see a person. You saw an image in your mind of what someone should look like to deserve your respect. That's not how this company works. The manager nodded quickly. You're absolutely right, sir. I made a mistake. I let my judgment get in the way. The CEO leaned forward slightly. You didn't just make a mistake. You embarrassed a customer in front of everyone. You made them feel small. What if it hadn't been me? What if it was someone else who didn't have the power to stand up for themselves? Would you have treated them the same way? The manager didn't answer. His throat tightened. No, sir, he said quietly. The CEO's eyes softened just slightly. I don't enjoy this, he said. I didn't come here today to teach a lesson. I came here to make a simple withdrawal. But now I have to decide what kind of example this situation will set for every employee who works under me. He paused, then looked to the regional manager. Call HR. The regional manager nodded, pulling out his phone and stepping aside. The manager's breathing grew shallow. He clasped his hands together nervously. Please, sir, he said quietly. I've worked here for years. I've dedicated everything to this branch. Don't let one misunderstanding end my career. The CEO looked at him for a long moment. You're right, it was a misunderstanding. But it was one built on arrogance, and arrogance has no place in leadership. The phone call ended quickly. The regional manager looked up and said, They're ready for your decision. The CEO nodded once. Effective immediately, he's relieved of his position. HR will contact him regarding formal procedures. The manager's shoulders slumped. He looked like all the air had left his body. Sir, please. The CEO stood up, his voice still calm but firm. You'll have time to reflect. I hope you learn from this, because what you did today is exactly what I built this company to fight against. The regional manager guided the man toward the door gently but firmly. As the office door opened, every employee looked up again. The manager's face was pale as he walked past them, not daring to meet anyone's eyes. He stopped briefly near the teller's counter and whispered, I'm sorry, but she didn't respond. The CEO stepped out of the office a moment later. The atmosphere shifted again. The staff stood straight, uncertain whether to speak or stay silent. He walked slowly to the center of the lobby and looked around. Can I have everyone's attention, please? The room went still. Even the customers who had been waiting put down their phones. The CEO's voice was calm but carried a quiet power. What happened here today shouldn't have happened. Not in this branch, not in any branch, not anywhere. Respect isn't something you give based on how someone looks, dresses, or sounds. It's something you owe every single person who walks through that door. The teller's eyes filled with tears as she listened. The guard lowered his gaze. The customers stood silently, ashamed of their earlier assumptions. I started this company, the CEO continued. because I wanted to create a place where people were treated with fairness and dignity, where no one would ever feel judged or dismissed because of who they are or where they come from. But today I saw that somewhere along the way that message was lost. He paused, letting the words sink in. That ends today. The employees nodded slowly, their faces showing a mix of guilt and relief. He turned to the teller who had helped him earlier. You, he said softly. You followed the manager's orders, but you also looked uncomfortable. Thank you for not adding to the disrespect. I'll remember that. The teller nodded, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean for it to go that way. I know, he said kindly. Sometimes it's hard to speak up. But next time don't be afraid to do what's right, even if it's uncomfortable. He then turned to the rest of the staff. From today onward, there will be new training for every employee in this company. Not just about customer service, but about humanity. We can't claim to be a trusted institution if we forget what trust is built on. The regional manager nodded beside him, taking mental notes. The CEO looked around the lobby once more. He could see how deeply his words were landing. Even the customers who had witnessed everything seemed moved. One of them, an older woman, quietly said, "Thank you for saying that." He gave her a small nod. "We all need reminders sometimes," he said. After a pause, he walked back to the counter where the whole issue had started. The teller quickly wiped her eyes and stood straight. "I'd still like to make that withdrawal," he said softly. "Yes, of course, sir," she said, her hands trembling as she began typing. The process that had taken nearly half an hour before now took only seconds. She handed him the receipt and the envelope of cash carefully. He took it, gave her a reassuring smile, and said, "Thank you." Then he turned to the rest of the staff. "Before I leave, I want you all to remember something," he said quietly. "Power doesn't come from titles. It comes from how you treat people when you think no one's watching." The teller nodded. The security guard looked down, ashamed. The regional manager looked proud but humbled. The CEO placed the envelope into his briefcase and walked toward the exit. The entire bank watched as he stepped through the glass doors. Outside, the same black car was waiting. The driver opened the door, but the CEO paused and looked back at the bank for a moment. Inside, everyone was still standing, reflecting on what had just happened. As he got into the car, the regional manager came out behind him. "Sir," he said softly, "that was handled with grace. Most people would have shouted." The CEO smiled faintly. "Shouting doesn't teach," he said, "but calmness does." The car door closed, and as it pulled away, the people inside the bank slowly returned to their routines. But nothing felt routine anymore. The story of what happened that day would spread across the company within hours. And for everyone who worked there, it would serve as a reminder that respect should never depend on appearance. Inside the branch, the teller whispered quietly to herself. He didn't even get angry. And that made it worse somehow. No one disagreed. The man who walked in wearing a simple shirt and jeans had left behind more than a lesson. He had left a mark that would last far. Longer than anyone expected. Would you like me to now write? Part 4, around 1,400 words, Sam. The next morning, sunlight spread softly across the city. The glass towers reflected the warm glow of a new day, but inside the CEO's office, things felt quiet and serious. He sat behind his desk, sipping black coffee as he went through reports from the previous night. His assistant had already updated him about the situation at the bank branch, how the news had traveled fast through every department, how employees were whispering about what happened. But he wasn't thinking about gossip. He was thinking about what that moment said about people, the way a few minutes of judgment could reveal years of misunderstanding. The regional manager stepped into the office. "Sir," he said gently, "the staff from the downtown branch are waiting in the conference room. You asked for a meeting this morning." The CEO nodded, setting down his cup. "Good, let's go." As they walked through the hallway, employees glanced up quietly, offering polite nods. Everyone had heard the story by now, how their CEO had been denied service at his own bank and how he handled it without shouting, without anger, only calm truth. To many, that calmness had hit harder than any punishment. When they entered the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. The branch staff sat together, still shaken from the day before. The teller looked nervous, twisting her fingers under the table. The security guard avoided eye contact. Even the regional manager kept a respectful distance, letting the CEO lead. He took a seat at the head of the table, looking at each of them in turn. His expression was steady, not cold, not angry, but thoughtful. "I called this meeting," he began slowly, "because what happened yesterday wasn't just about one person or one mistake. It was about what we've forgotten as a company." No one spoke. The only sound came from the hum of the air conditioner. He continued, his voice calm and sincere. "We built this company on trust, fairness, and respect. I started it with nothing but a small office and a belief that everyone, no matter who they are, should be treated with dignity when they walk into a bank. That's not just good business, it's the right thing to do." He paused for a moment, letting his words settle. "But yesterday, in one of our own branches, I was reminded how easy it is to lose sight of that." The teller's eyes filled with tears again. She opened her mouth to say something, but closed it quickly, not wanting to interrupt. The CEO leaned back in his chair. "I didn't go to that branch to test anyone. I went there because I wanted to handle something simple. I wasn't wearing a suit or a watch. I didn't walk in with bodyguards or cameras. I just wanted to be treated like any other customer, and that's exactly the point. Anyone who walks through those doors deserves respect, whether they're rich or poor, dressed up or dressed down." The security guard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sir, I'm truly sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to." The CEO raised a hand gently. "I know you didn't mean harm, but that's what makes it worse. Sometimes the harm we cause isn't from what we intend. It's from what we assume." The guard nodded, looking down at the table. The CEO continued, his tone softer now. "When I stood at that counter yesterday, I watched how quickly people judged me. Not because of what I said, but because of what I looked like. It made me think. How many people walk into our branches every day and get treated the same way? How many walk out feeling smaller than when they came in?" The room stayed silent. No one could look at him directly. He took a deep breath and leaned forward. "You know, when I was younger, I went into a bank to open my first account. I didn't have much, just a few $100s. The man at the desk barely looked at me. He acted like I was wasting his time. That day I promised myself that if I ever owned a bank, I'd make sure no one ever felt that way again." The teller looked up, her eyes red. "And we made you feel that way," she said softly. He nodded. "Yes. But you also gave me a reminder. Maybe I've been too focused on numbers and growth and forgot that the heart of this company is people." The regional manager took a small breath, speaking carefully. "Sir, everyone has been talking about what happened. The other branches are shaken too. They're scared, but also inspired." "Inspired?" the CEO asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," the regional manager said. "They've seen how you handled it, with calm and dignity. They're proud to work under someone who practices what he preaches." The CEO smiled faintly. "I didn't do it to make a point. I did it because losing control never teaches anyone, but reflection does." He stood up, walking toward the window. The view showed the busy city below. Cars moving, people rushing, life continuing as usual. "I don't want anyone fired because of fear. I want them to change because they understand." He turned back to face the group. "The manager is no longer with us, yes, but that's not the victory. The real victory will be if everyone in this room walks out today and chooses to be better." The teller spoke up softly. "Sir, how do we do that?" "Start by seeing people," he said simply. "Not status, not background, not clothing, just people." He walked closer to her and placed a gentle hand on the back of her chair. "When someone stands in front of you, don't see a problem to solve. See a story. You never know who that person is, what they've gone through, or what they've built." Her eyes filled again, but this time with something closer to gratitude than shame. The CEO turned back to the table. "I'm introducing new training for every employee starting next week. It won't be about sales targets or efficiency. It'll be about humanity. We'll learn how to listen better, how to treat everyone with respect, and how to handle every customer as if they were family." The regional manager nodded firmly. "We'll make it happen, sir. The CEO gave a small smile. Good, because respect is our real currency. If we lose that, no amount of money will save us. He paused again and looked around the room. You've all learned something important these past 24 hours. Maybe it hurt. Maybe it embarrassed you. But sometimes the lessons that sting the most are the ones that change us forever. The teller nodded slowly. The guard murmured an apology again. Even the junior staff who hadn't spoken yet looked deeply affected. After a long silence, the CEO said quietly, "All right, go back to your branch. Do your jobs. But this time, do them with heart. Let what happened to me never happen to anyone else, especially not under this company's name." They all stood almost at the same time and began to leave. One by one, they stopped near the door to thank him quietly. Not out of fear, but out of respect. When they were gone, the regional manager lingered. "Sir," he said softly, "what you did yesterday, it changed things. Not just in that branch, in the whole company." The CEO looked at him thoughtful. Change doesn't start with a policy, it starts with a person. He walked back to his desk, picked up a photo frame, and looked at it. It was an old picture of him standing in front of a small rented office, smiling with a few employees on the first day his company opened. "I wanted to build something honest," he said quietly. "Maybe yesterday reminded me that I still have work to do." The regional manager smiled faintly. "You've already done more than most." "Maybe," the CEO said, placing the photo back. "But as long as someone out there feels unseen, I'm not done yet." Later that afternoon, he drove past the same branch again. He didn't go inside. He just watched from his car. Through the glass doors, he could see the teller talking to a customer. She smiled this time genuinely, not out of routine. The guard opened the door for an elderly man and helped him carry a bag inside. The whole place already felt different. The CEO smiled quietly to himself. Change had begun, not through punishment, but through realization. As his car drove away, he looked out the window thinking about how small moments can reveal the biggest truths. He had been denied a service that should have been simple, but what he gained from that experience was far more valuable. He had seen the cracks in the foundation of his own dream, and he was determined to rebuild it stronger than before. When he reached his headquarters, he went straight to the boardroom where the senior executives were waiting. They all stood when he entered. "Please sit down," he said, waving gently. One of the directors spoke nervously. "Sir, we heard about what happened. It's been all over internal messages. We're so sorry you had to experience that." The CEO smiled faintly. "Don't be sorry. Be aware." They looked at him, puzzled. "What happened was painful, but it was also a gift," he said. "It showed me what we need to fix, not just in our systems, but in our hearts. We'll review our hiring, our training, everything. I want kindness to be part of this company's DNA." The directors nodded, writing notes quickly. He looked around the table, his voice calm but powerful. "People think running a business is about money. It's not. It's about trust. You can earn $1 million and still lose everything if you lose people's trust." No one spoke. They just listened. When the meeting ended, he stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker as evening settled. Somewhere across town, the same branch was closing for the day. The teller was probably thinking about what he said. The staff were likely reflecting on the lesson. And the customers who had witnessed it all were telling their families about the man who didn't raise his voice yet changed everything. The CEO smiled softly. Sometimes the strongest message isn't spoken with anger. It's spoken with calm truth. And his truth had just begun to ripple through an entire company.